Hello. Happy Thursday. So, sadly, we will not be doing Am I the A-hole today. Unfortunately, Jill is sick, and she gave me permission to say, thank you, Druid. She gave me permission to say we are not doing Am I the A-hole because Jill's a-hole is being an a-hole. I was like, oh, Jill, they're going to love to hear that. But yeah, she has got that stomach bug that's going around. I guess it might be food poisoning. I don't know. She's just been feeling terrible since Tuesday. So anyway, we will not be doing our little fun presentation today, but Don't worry. I have them in my back pocket. We'll get back to them. So today's going to be a little bit of a mixed bag, and we'll actually probably have time to read that whole chapter from Heritage of Cotton about the Industrial Revolution. It's a really long chapter, so what better time than to knock it out when, plans fell through. I don't want to say when we don't have something better to do. That would sound awful. So I have a stack of books that I wanted to show off. A couple of them I got before Christmas, but several of them I purchased with my Christmas funds. They're just a couple. They're all Abe book purchases. I don't think I bought anything new. I'm looking through here. No. No books purchased new. So, but I wanted to show those off because one of them is one of the same books that Jill showed off on Quilt Nerding the other day. But my other ones are different. So they're the stuff I'm going to be, hopefully, fingers crossed, reading this year on my own for my own scholarship. But there's a couple of them that I'm wondering if they will cross over into our cotton world. So got that in mind. And, one of the ways of researching, I don't know that it's, hey, Jill, I don't know if you heard me. I just did the bit about we can't do am I the a-hole because your a-hole's an a-hole. I'm probably the only one laughing. Our friend Anne is like, I draw the line at buttholes. You stop it. So, but one of the ways of researching, and, Jill talks about a lot of times, when she gets a new book, she looks at the big bibliography and TMI girl. She looks at the bibliography to find new books. And I think that is a fantastic way of really filling out your library and finding things on the topic. But another thing that I've been doing, and I'm not going to say that it's the best research tip in the world, but for books that have an index, look for keywords. So for instance, we're talking about cotton. And I'll spill the beans. One of the books is Holland Mania. So it's talking about the Dutch and how this is specifically the unknown Dutch period in American art and culture. So it's very specific to, I think, Dutch printing processes and how, those showed up in the U.S. or in America. But I thought the Dutch are involved in this cotton thing, right? So I thought, well, maybe there's something about cotton and hair. I have not found it yet. It is not in the index the index. Nothing about cotton in the index, but it doesn't mean it's not in here. So this is one that I'm going to kind of put on in the cotton pile to see if I can find some more information, that goes along with what we're researching. Or what we're reading. So anyway, that's one book, but I wanted to show you these books. I also have a little tiny thing to show you related to that Art Basel thing that, Carrie Scott on Instagram, she had posted, it's a week now, and I still need to make my reel. I just remixed her reel, but I wanted to make my own. So I have a couple things to show about that came across my desk this week. And then I have one passage to read out of The Empire of Cotton because we're starting this Industrial Revolution piece. And I found a section in that book that I think is interesting to start with, and then we'll see what our friend Mr. Crawford has to say. So before we get to books and stuff, I can't remember if I showed you guys this. So I apologize if I did. It has been a crazy week. But I made one of the little miniatures that I got for Christmas. This is one of the ones that it's like a resin kit. And if you guys remember the little Yule log little kit that I had. And I remember me saying this was resin, this was nuts, this was not for children. Yes, I still stand by that. They're for older children, teenagers, perhaps, people who are into miniatures and dollhouse aficionados and whatnot. And you really need better tools than they provide in these little kits. Like they have these big clunky tweezers. I dug out some precision tweezers from our toolbox, and I think I got a much better result. So without further ado, I made a little tiny shrimp cocktail. And I may have showed this. I'm so blanking on this, but I mean, look at this thing. And I know my camera is not picking it up super good. I need to take some pictures of it. But these little shrimps, they look like little shrimps. And, it's got this little parsley, I guess. And it comes with a fork. So I could use some of the extra, hey Quiltish. I could use some of the extra resin. It's supposed to be cocktail sauce, by the way, to put a shrimp on the fork. Is it not the cute as heck? And yes, Jill, I agree. Well, they may give you more salmonella. But yeah, I mean, they truly look like little shrimps. And for a minute I thought of like, oh, I could put them in here like the Beetlejuice. But I was like, nah, I'll just make it a cute shrimp cocktail. So one of my little animals or dolls or characters is going to get to eat a shrimp cocktail. And I saw this guy online that does these. And he gets the retro mini brands too, the little tiny products that my advent calendar, and he gives them to his Gundam. Now Gundam, if you're not familiar, they kind of look like Transformers. I mean that's what they look like to me. I don't know their whole backstory. They are a Japanese robot thing. My son has all the stuff. They're like, you build these models. So anyway, this guy's Gundam is about this big. So he makes all these little things and gets all these miniatures, and they go like in the Gundam's hand. So it's this like big transformer looking robot thing, and it's wearing like a silly little Barbie hat, and it has like a something like a shrimp cocktail or some brownies in its hand. It's really funny. So I love watching what these people do with miniatures. They're not all going in doll houses. So, and one other fun thing, when you start cleaning out and digging through things, you find stuff you totally forgot. I was actually looking for a particular craft supply the other day, and I thought, maybe it's something I tossed in a tin in my cabinets. I'm going through and pulling out all the tins and looking at them. You guys, I don't know when I got this, why I stashed it away. But look, it's a little teeny singer. I guess it's supposed to look like a singer, like one of the Red Eye singers, I guess. And it's metal, so it's got some heft to it. Isn't it cute? I love tiny things. So yeah, I have this idea. I finally have an idea for my Phoebe Buffet dollhouse. So I have to figure out who's going to get to inhabit it. Anyway, I have 3 big cardboard boxes that it's gonna be interesting. I'm telling you guys. There is an artist named Ann Wood. I don't think I've shown her to you guys before. I could be wrong. I will show her off another time, but I've taken classes from her. She's a fascinating lady. But she has all these patterns for little ragdoll type things, and like there's a cat and there's a crow. She makes these beautiful crows out of like vintage and antique fabrics and stuff. So she has like all these free tutorials on her website for these adorable little dollhouse settings. And so she shows like how to make a little bed out of clothespins, and like regular clothespins, like the springy type, not the antique ones. So you just take apart some of those springy clothespins, and the way you glue them together, it makes this adorable little bed, and then you paint it. And then she shows how to make little quilts and little rugs and things. So I've always been so inspired by her. And she has instructions for basically building, out of cardboard little houses and stuff. So I think I'm going to take a few tips from her. She also has this really adorable, like, I think it's more of a diorama than a dollhouse, because I don't think she takes the things in and out, but they're mosquitoes. She was making fiber mosquitoes, and they have, I think, a needle for their, whatever, the proboscis that they bite you with. And they're just adorable. They're so creative and cute. And so she's made this whole little diorama house for them and stuff. So anyway, I'm going to take some cues from her. Not necessarily the tutorial stuff, but kind of some ideas of what works well. So stay tuned for that. That's probably going to be a long time project that I will I will contribute to as often as I can. All right. Let's talk about the books first. So here's the stack the stack I got in the fall. And I already mentioned Hallowmania. This one was recommended to me because it was related to some, I think it was printed cottons, and our friend Dawn Ronigan, I was talking to her about some stuff, and she said, I got a lot of information about those Dutch prints from this book. And she recommended it. So I ordered it and just haven't had a time really to look at it. But I did flip through to see, and it is mostly like, you know, these sort of Dutch kind of stereotypes, I guess, and how those show up, like the Dutch costume. And then, you know, some of the, I guess, I don't know, pop culture, that's probably the wrong word for it, but, you know, just the way that the Dutch culture and stuff showed up here in the U.S. So, and I assume tulips are probably going to come out here. So we'll see. It looks really interesting. So that's one. And then it was probably October. A friend of mine, hadn't seen her in a little bit and met up and talked with her for a little bit at Baltimore Applique Society meeting. And she told me she was reading this book. And I had heard about this book, but I was kind of like, Claire Hunter is an incredible writer. She is fantastic. She wrote, oh gosh, it's always right on the tip of my tongue. And of course it's going to say in here what her previous book is. Of course not. Of course not. Is it The Golden Needle? No, The Golden Needle might be somebody else. She was the one that was like Threads of something. In any event, there are 2 fiber books that came out sometime over the pandemic or before, and she wrote one of them. But anyway, my friend is reading this, and she said, oh yeah, it's worth it. The Golden Thread. See, I can't remember if that's Claire Hunter or that's the other person. There were 2 that came out right around the same time. Claire Hunter was one, and then there was the other one. One was The Golden Thread, and one was something else, and I can't remember who did what. In any event, it's history. It's Mary Queen of Scots, of course, but it's about her needlework and, you know, the history around that. So Threads of Life. Yes, thank you, Jill. So Threads of Life is Claire Hunter. But yeah, she's such a fantastic writer, and you know, just so interesting. So I'm excited about this one, and you know, it's got the ye old Mary Queen of Scots kind of stuff in here, so it'll be exciting to read this one. And then Jill was showing off her Christmas books the other day, and I was like, oh yeah, that particular one is on my wish list. Well, dang if I forgot. I actually ordered it off my wish list before, it might have even been before Halloween. So, because you have not heard about them because they've been sitting in a pile completely ignored. So I do have this book. Jill got this one for Christmas. It's The Needle's Eye, Women in Work in the Age of the Revolution. In the Age of Revolution by Marla R. Miller. And so this one I did buy, and I flipped through it and I'm like, ooh, it's a little academic. So I'd had this in a stack, and I kind of had thought like maybe this is one we can read later this year, but I don't know. I'm not sure. This one's some kind of heavy duty reading. And I don't know. I don't know about you and your book club interest, but I like things that aren't too hard. I don't want my brain to break just, you know, trying to get through chapters. So anyway, again, remains a book on my stack to read. Now, for the books I bought with my Christmas money, these are absolutely brand new editions. First of all, Nancy Crow. Now, Nancy Crow, yeah, Jill, I think it's too academic, really, to be enjoyed like in a book. I don't want to ever make anybody think like, oh, we don't think you're smart enough to read academic books. I'm sometimes not smart enough to read academic books, but I don't make that judgment about other people. But yeah, it's like academic, like it's too stressful to read, I think, sometimes academic books for like a book club, because you're on a timeline. So now, Nancy Crow. Mary Fonz, back in the quilt nerd days, Mary Fonz talked about Nancy Crow quite a bit. And, you know, I of course had heard her name, but I really never knew much about her. And, you know, she's coming out of the studio art quilts movement. And, you know, I mean, she's continuing to work, and her stuff is very specific looking. And from what I understand, she teaches wonderful classes. I think she's apparently giving one soon. And I've heard them described as like masters in fiber arts in a weekend or something like that, because she's like really tough on people in terms of like, she's not the kind of teacher who's just like, oh, here's how we applique, like, oh, go applique this example I've given you, like, oh, you did a great job, just keep practicing, which is generally what, when you're teaching, you know, outside of an academic space, you're just doing, you know, classroom workshops and things. You're not going to go and tell your students like, oh man, your embroidery is terrible. You want to encourage people. But apparently Nancy Crow will come by and be like, sucks. Not really, but she's very hard on people. She, you know, she will tell you like, that is not going to work out. That doesn't, you know, that doesn't work. So I'm interested in looking more at her work. And so I got this book, Crossroads, Construction, Markings, and Structure, and Nancy Crow, forward by David Hornung. And it's not a super thick book. It's mostly pictures. So I'll take time to look at this, and I'll share anything in here that, you know, looks super interesting. But some of the pictures in here, just as I was flipping through, you know, some of these studio pictures, and I think Mary might have shown this picture, because when I flipped through and saw it, it looked so familiar to me. But this is like her studio space. And, you know, you can see kind of like some of these ethnographic textiles and like doodads and things, masks and you know, like, I don't know if these are gourd instruments or yeah, some of them look like instruments and some of them just like vessels. But you can see the stuff in here that is obviously inspiring her. And what I thought was really interesting about this is when you really look at her work and then look at some of these textiles, like these ethnographic textiles, you can see her influences. You know, and again, let me just... So that is one of her pieces in progress. It's on her design wall. But then look at the stuff at the top. You know, and again, this stuff over here, and you could start to see like where she's kind of pulling out elements. And, you know, I'm not saying like that is exactly from this, but, you know, she's pulling elements from, you know, things she sees, obviously. And, you know, that kind of work is really exciting. So Nancy Crow, and she's got a bunch of books, so that's not the only one. Let's see. Jill said she's going to make some affiliate links for Amazon. Yeah. Definitely. Thank you, Jill. And I'm glad you're here. Because if you had to wait for me to get around to give you a list, it might be a while. All right. So you guys know, of course, one of my big 4 projects this year is looking at big A art. And so, you know, I'm off on my Robert Rauschenberg obsession. And as a reminder, we're gonna be screening on Valentine's Day evening. It'll probably be 7 p.m. ish, maybe 8 p.m. Friday, Valentine's Day, February 14th. I'm going to screen the documentary about Rauschenberg and his grand prize win at the Venice Biennale in 1964. It's controversial, so it'll be fun. It's a fairly new documentary. And what's going to happen with that, just so that you're aware, I'm going to give you guys a link to a Google document just so you can answer a couple questions. The problem is, and if you were part of Quilt Nerd, you know all this already, but if you were not part of Quilt Nerd or you're newer to Twitch is kind of a pain in the butt sometimes, in that you're my subscriber, but I only know about you. Sorry, my filter keys are. All I know about you is your Twitch handle, unless for some reason we've interacted in person and I have your contact information. So, what I need to do to make sure, you know, subscribers are the only ones in this event is I need your email addresses. And I know for some of you I already have them, but just to make this easy, I got to put this on you. So if you are a subscriber and you're interested in coming to this private screening, and the reason I need to keep it to subscribers is I need to keep it private, is that you'll just fill out this form. It's just asking for your email address, your Twitch handle, and so that, you know, I can check subscribers, and I'll send you a link, and then you'll be able to join, and it'll be on YouTube. So I'll give you more information. I'll remind you, and I'm probably going to send the link out probably February 1st, or whatever stream is right there, the last January 1st February stream. So remember that, and I'll just throw it out there. Yes, if you can't make it live, if you unlike me, your husband's going to take you somewhere on Valentine's Day, you can still register, and I'll leave the watch party up for a little while. It's going to be private, so it's not just going to be out there for people to find, but you'll have the link and you'll be able to look at it afterwards. So don't worry if you're not available. You don't necessarily have to be there live. So, and I'll reiterate all that stuff. I just wanted to throw it out there, what was on my mind. Okay, next. I wanted to touch on the Art Basel stuff, because is fiber arts just a trend in Big A? Or is it something like fiber artists are finally getting some traction? If you remember, again, Carrie Scott, she's a curator, and I don't know her. I only know what I've seen, you know, on her Instagram and on her YouTube channel. She's coming from, I think, the perspective of art writing and curation. So she's not necessarily like a expert specifically in fiber art. So, you know, I cut her some slack for that, because you can't be an expert in everything, you know. In the art world, in museums, you kind of do what you are trained in and what you know, and then you pick up other skills. So she may not be like a super, especially if fiber art is new to Art Basel in this Big A art world. She may not be knowledgeable, and that's okay. That's all right. She did make a few mistakes. And one of them, I think the one that kind of was the biggest, and I know I mentioned this when I showed you guys her video, her reel, is that she mentioned Sanford Biggers, and she mentioned, you know, are these the people like him pushing the envelope? Well, yeah, but Sanford Biggers is not a fiber artist. He is using other people's fiber in his work. So I'm more interested in native fiber artists. Like, they're not just taking a quilt, or they're not just taking a basket or somebody's, you know, tapestry and doing something else with it, but rather they are making those things themselves. Those are the artists I'm most interested in, because any artist in the Big A, you know, Big A art community, many artists are multimedia artists, and they take lots of found objects, and it really burns me up when we were going to call a quilt a found object. When I think of found objects, I think of shit on the street. You know, like, oh, look at this metal garbage I found. Won't it make a fun sculpture? But found objects can be anything. Found objects can be, you know, somebody's quilt that you got at a antique store. You can call that a found object. So, long story short, Fiber Art Now is a fantastic magazine. And if you were unaware, it is published by the same people that publish Quilt Folk. Good Lord, Stephanie. Anybody in there? So yeah, Quilt Folk, which I'm sure a majority of you that are quilt people know Quilt Folk. Our friend Mary Fons used to be the editor. But yeah, a couple years ago, I think it's only been about 2 years, Mike McCormick is the publisher of Quilt Folk. He saved Fiber Art Now from dissolving. I think they were in a position where I think their subscribership was down. They were kind of struggling. So Mike stepped in and, you know, purchased the publication, and has really increased its, you know, the quality of the magazine. And it doesn't have ads in it, and it's very like an art journal kind of thing. So every year they do this thing called Excellence in Fibers. And so they have all of the excellence in fibers. So this is what the opening spread looks like. Now, the stuff you're going to see in the Fiber Arts magazine includes quilts. They're always art quilts. You're never going to see anything traditional looking, because these are current fiber artists. and majority of current fiber artists, especially in galleries, are not making traditional looking quilts. But it's also stuff like fiber manipulation, and multimedia use of fiber, mixed media use of fiber, basketry, weaving, embroidery. These are all the things. Quilts take up a little bit of space. But let me show you the winners of the Fiber Arts and Excellence for this year. And so we've got an honorable mention, and I have seen this piece, not in person, but I've seen it in other publications. It's called Marion with Flowers, and it's an embroidery piece. And I apologize, I did not have time to scan these. I know it's better to look at these, as an image scan, but very cool piece. It's very it's a portrait, but it's it's got this abstract, or not abstract, this sort of painterly kind of, I don't know what you want to call that. I went to art school and I still don't know what to call things sometimes. So that's the honorable mention. For some reason, third prize, I don't know why they did this. Third prize they had after second prize. So third prize is a quilt. So that's this. I've also seen this, I want to say online. Very cool. You've got a little close up of it. It looks like it's all straight line quilting. But I love the fact, look at that shape. And that shape kind of reminds me a couple different things. It kind of brings to mind Jill and I, in the quilt nerding group, we just finished reading To Honor and Comfort before the holidays, and that was about Native American quilting and arts in the Native culture. And so it almost looks like kind of those, the butterfly dance robes. It also kind of reminds me, it's kind of got a kimono type of vibe to it. And best I can tell, it's hard to see, but I think it is 5 different panels. So if you look here, unfold this. So each of these pieces is a panel. So this big one in the middle is like a big panel, and then each of these on the sides are also panels. So that's interesting. It's technically not one quilt, but 5 little quilts. And little, I say little, it's 53 by 35, so it's a wall piece. Okay, and then the other one, let's see. Here's second prize, and this one's all embroidery, but also applique of existing textiles, clothing. So I thought this was interesting. At first, I thought this was a thread painting, like a sewing machine kind of work, but it is. I think it's hand embroidery. So this is a portrait of the artist's children, and the T-shirt that the one kid is wearing, and then this sweater that the other child is wearing, are actual pieces of clothing. And then I think their hair is fiber that she's manipulated. I can't tell whether it's it must be cotton, because she just says cotton thread and upcycle clothing. And then all of the shading and everything on the kid's arms and face and the background is all embroidery. So very cool. Second place. And then first prize really surprised me. This is first prize. So first of all, you can see it is inspired by some architecture. And then look at what it is. Can you tell what it is? This is rug making technique. So what it says here is hand-dyed wool yarn, cotton rug warp, pulled through and wrapped around the warp. So I think that what this artist is doing, her name is Nancy Thune. She's from Hoboken, New Jersey. I think what she's doing is she's pulling it through and wrapping it somehow. But nonetheless, it is starting off and is looking like a rug making technique. And if you can't get much more super fiber arty than that. Our friend Anne, who again, over on Quilt Nerding, we read her book, Patchwork Pillowcases. She also does a rug hooking, and she makes these beautiful little mats and rugs. So every time I see something like this, I'm like, oh, I understand how that's done because our friend Anne does it, and I've seen her work on a piece. So I just, when I saw this, I was like, what? That looks just like Anne's, the technique that Anne uses. And it is based on, it's a piece of architecture that's in Kuala Lumpur. They have very tall buildings in Malaysia. So that's what this is. So, okay. Now, granted, this isn't Art Basel, but this is a respected fiber art journal. And so that's the kind of stuff that's winning prizes. We're not talking about, some boring old woven tapestry. Not that tapestries aren't interesting, but sometimes it's like, you've seen one, you've seen them all. Like they're not pushing the envelope very much, but this stuff is very, like, across the board interesting fiber arts, in my opinion. So 2 other ones that I'll just show really quickly that I just happen to love is, first of all, this thing. Yeah. All right. I forget. Look at this. This is like it's a vessel with a zipper on the top. It doesn't appear to have straps, so I don't think that it's like supposed to be like a purse or a bag. I think the zipper is more about the intent of the piece, because it's called A Darkness Within. And this person, Joe Arici, is from very close to me. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania is not too far from where I live. So I'm always like, local artist, somebody in my neck of the woods. But what they have done here is, it's nylon thread, and they have done like a hand knotting technique. Like macrame, kind of making knots. And then it's got this, it's this bright and kind of, shifting colors on the outside. And then the inside is this, jet black, looks like probably some kind of fabric or something. But how fascinating is that? Because, it's clearly all of this interesting work that went into this. And then I'm just going like, how did they make it round like that? How did they make it this vessel? I would love to look at this object and just turn it around in my hands, and see. And it's fairly small. It says, 5.5 by 7 by 7 inches. So it's fairly small, but my goodness, look at that again. Look at all of, that's all little macrame knots, like different, at first I thought it was beads, but yeah, once you look close, you can see that they're little macrame knots. So fascinating. And then one last one I thought was really interesting. It's Ingrid Bergman. And at first, when I glanced at it, I thought, ooh, is this a quilt? And I was like, oh no, maybe it's embroidery. Oh no, it's crochet. Ingrid Bergman in freeform crochet. And what the artist says, it's natural and synthetic yarns, canvas, freeform crochet mounted on canvas. So it looks like it's probably some separate pieces that, the artist did these crocheted elements and stitched them together, and then they're mounted on and stabilized by pieces of canvas, is my guess. But wow, so crochet, I know how to crochet. I've never really made anything significant out of crochet other than like, some little doodad. But when I think of crochet, I think of, your standard, like the things that grandmas make, baby booties. And, there's a whole swath of crocheters, like millennials and Gen Z love crochet. And that was a horrible generational comment. I don't mean it like that. There's a lot of young folks that have, kind of jumped into crochet and are doing new things with it. This is nothing new. I remember when I was much younger, there was this whole revival of knitting and crochet. But when I think of those things, I think of the stuff I see people making now, like amigurumi, the little crocheted, cute little creatures, and crocheted hats. And a friend of mine makes these amazing crocheted baskets. Those are the things I think of. I don't think of a portrait, so to me, this is utilizing a very traditional, form of fiber manipulation into something that is so surprising. So this is pushing the envelope of fiber arts. And again, please understand, I love Sanford Biggers. I love his work, but he is not pushing the bounds of fiber arts just because he uses quilts in his work or used quilts in his work. I think the Code Switch was the big, series that had the quilts. They were like these kind of, I don't know what to call them. These kind of almost like architectural sort of geometric shapes, these sculptures, and then various surfaces of them were covered with quilt pieces, and then he painted and all this stuff. Fantastic work. Don't get me wrong. That is not pushing the bounds of fiber arts in the big A art world. This work is. So now, does the rest of the world think that? Maybe. I don't know. But I think that. So, okay. I talked about that. Oh, okay. Now I sidetracked off of my Christmas books. This one's not a big deal. Robert Rauschenberg. I think this one is actually his biography. A biography. Robert Rauschenberg. So, we're getting into that one. Now, you can't talk about Robert Rauschenberg and Willem de Kooning and Jackson Pollock without talking about their wives. And I heard about this fantastic book called Ninth Street Women, and it is about Lee Krasner, Elaine de Kooning, Grace Hardigan, Joan Mitchell, and Helen Frankenthaler. Now, Lee Krasner was Jackson Pollock's wife, and Elaine de Kooning is Willem de Kooning's wife. And then the other three women are, they're well-known, and they're all painters. And so this is mid-century. So looking forward to this book. But you guys, now, a huge chunk of this book, and I was telling Jill this, a huge chunk of this book is the bibliography and the endnotes and all that stuff. So that much of it is bibliography and endnotes, but that much of it, like 726 pages of this book are about these five women. And the print is very tiny. It is tiny, tiny print. It will probably take me the rest of my life to read this book, but gosh darn it, I'm going to read it because these women were very important and influential in the art world. These women were getting their work into galleries at a time when women were scoffed at. And, I know I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know. Somebody the other day mentioned, when I was talking about all this similar stuff, mentioned the woman that did those, the paintings of the children with the big eyes in the 60s. And I think the movie about her was called Big Eyes. And I think it was Nicole Kidman, if I remember correctly, was in it. And I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, but her husband took total credit for her work. Her husband, was taking her paintings and selling them, and it was great. They were being sold, but nobody knew they were hers. So, again, women were not treated well in the art world. Still aren't, but they were treated super bad then. There are a couple of other women that I've read about more recently where they literally toiled in utter obscurity. They're well known now, but in the time, during their lifetime, they were doing like really, really amazing work. And mostly I'm talking about abstract expressionism because that's what, a lot of these artists were doing back then. 1950s, 1960s, this is that era. But there are some amazing artists that these women were doing stuff that to me, to my semi-trained eye, could stand right up beside, any one of these male artists. And, they never could break into the gallery world. Certainly were not represented in any way at any of these, major art fairs. Didn't go to the Venice Biennale. This week I didn't have time to look at the Venice Biennale as I had planned, but I'm very curious to know if somebody has looked at the Venice Biennale since its inception in the late 1800s and see, like, every year the artists that are represented, what is the percentage between, men and women? I'm hoping somebody has done that. I'd be very interested to know. And finally, this one I'm super excited about. And it's a thin book. So hopefully it's not, and it's got pictures, I think. So hopefully it's not going to take me forever to read this. But I think that this one's going to be interesting because it touches on a whole bunch of different artists, from like before, like Caravaggio, like early, all the way down to, Picasso and Manet and Damien Hirst, who is a current contemporary artist that is much hated. Marcel Duchamp, and of course, Rubens, and I'm just, looking at names that I know, Botticelli, and then of course Rauschenberg, de Kooning, and all those. It is called The Devil in the Gallery. So I'm like, and it's how scandal, shock, and rivalry shaped the art world. So this will be interesting. I'm very excited about this. And then one other book, I did not have it handy to grab because it's upstairs, but it's called, it's Women in the Art World, basically If There Were No Men. And that one also is going to be very interesting. So those are all the books I'm going to try to read this year and might not actually get it all done. But the peer pressure I need from you guys. I need you to ask me, you reading any books, Stephanie? Or are you reading one page and falling asleep? Okay, before we move on to really looking at the cotton books, I have some updates on Cake Makes a Cult. I did do some work this week on it, and I am not prepared to really, reveal any of that because, was it rule number 6, I think, of that ChatGPT told me of how to start a cult was you got to keep some mystery and mystique. Got to keep the people coming back wanting more. So I'm gonna keep some of my work under wraps until I'm ready to release it. But I promised you we'd have a name, and we do. So, without further ado, the runner-up was Threadhaven, and I liked Threadhaven, but the winner is the Fringe Fellowship. The Fringe Fellowship! I love it! It's got everything. Remember there was a Bill Hader used to do a thing on SNL where he was like this, party promoter, and everything was like those crazy nightclub, rave scene kind of places, and he'd be like, it's got everything. Well, the Fringe Fellowship has everything. We've got fringe. We got fringe. We've got, like, I don't have anything that's fringy, but fringe on clothing and upholstery. And then we've got the idea of fringe, like the outskirts, the fringes of society. I love it. It's got so much meaning. So you guys, you made a good choice. It definitely was one of my top. So I think, the Fringe Fellowship and Threadhaven were kind of my top two. And, yeah, you guys, democratically, this is a democratic cult. Oh my God. Is this a new thing? I don't know, but you guys decided. And, I told you I wasn't going to tell you what my decision was until you told me. So the Fringe Fellowship it is. Now, had you all voted for something completely different, like Fabric of Grace, I would still lie to you and tell you that the Fringe Fellowship won. I'm kidding. The Fringe Fellowship truly won. So you now know what to call this ambiguous art project cult that you belong to. It is called the Fringe Fellowship, and subscription to Cake TV gets you automatic membership in the cult. Now, if you would like to opt out, I fully respect that. You just need to let me know. But I'm just going to assume you're part of the cult if you don't tell me otherwise. Yes, this art project gets weirder as the days go by. By the end of the year, we will either have a fully functional cult. Yes, Quiltish, you're in a cult. I don't know if you missed the show the other day, but yes, I should probably preface this. I should probably give the little overview of the cult every time I talk about it, just to make sure everybody's in the know. But yeah, this is one of my 4 major art projects this year. I got this kooky, crazy idea because I always joke with my friends about, like, you know what, let's start a cult. And it'll be a cult for good. It'll be a democratic cult, but we're a cult. We have to have some sort of culty religious inner workings in order to get the tax benefits, basically. And that's on my to-do list, is find out about, registering a cult. Okay, on to something more serious. Marginally serious. So, Empire of Cotton. I know our dear friend Dee Marie is like, are we going to get to read that book? Oh, Lordy. It's a lot. This book is really a lot, but it is so good. And Sven Beckert is a very good writer. And it's what he writes, I think, is very readable. It's not super academic, but it's just a lot. Plus, we would have to read this as a book club book. We can't read it. I can't read it to you because of copyright. So, but I would like to read one passage to you because it's prefacing what we're going to read in Morris's book today about the Industrial Revolution, about that spread, and kind of like what's going on there. And I found this really great passage in here where he gives like dates and names of things and is really talking about mills in so many places. And I'm not sure that Morris Crawford, MDC Crawford, I don't know. When I flip through his book, I don't see a lot of these countries that Sven Beckert is going to cite here. So I think this is going to be interesting. And then I'll read you these passages and then we'll see what Morris has to say. So this section, again, is from Empire of Cotton by Sven Beckert. And this passage is in Industrial Capitalism Takes Wing. So now, at this point in the book, Sven has already talked about war capitalism and enslavement and all kinds of stuff, which Morris doesn't get into necessarily. I do know that he's going to talk about slavery in The Heritage of Cotton, but we know just the difference between whenever this book was written, just a few years ago, I think, is it 2014? Yeah, so between 1924 and 2014, what has the scholarship in cotton production, how has that changed? So, Industrial Capitalism Takes Wing. This is a piece of that. So, British tinkers' revolutionary methods for the production of cotton yarn spread rapidly, probably more rapidly than any other previous manufacturing technology. This is exciting because remember, the mechanism of the Industrial Revolution can be very clearly tied back to fabric production and fabric manipulation. So printing on fabric and weaving fabric are the hallmarks of the Industrial Revolution. It certainly helped that travelers, journals, newspapers, and learned societies trumpeted these wondrous advances. But even more influential must have been the influx of British traders carrying yarn and finished cotton cloth at unbeatable prices. Remember the trade and the embargoes and all the stuff? European and North American consumers, introduced to the wonderful properties of cotton through relatively expensive goods made in India, responded swiftly and enthusiastically, as did consumers in regions of the world that had produced their own cotton fabrics for centuries or millennia. So this is interesting because you're like, okay, England is getting their stuff out. And we know it's complicated how they're doing it. There's some homegrown stuff. There's the Indian, colonialization, and they're trading that stuff too. So this is interesting. As more people bought cheap cottons, entrepreneurs in more countries became convinced that they could produce the same goods. With equal enthusiasm, skilled artisans, adventurers, state bureaucrats, and budding entrepreneurs embraced the new machines and techniques. By 1800, as we have seen, the first mechanized spinning mills had sprung up in Britain, France, the German lands, the United States, Russia, Switzerland, and Netherlands, and Belgium. So some of these we know about. Morris has mentioned France. He's mentioned Germany. Of course, the U.S. and Britain. We know that, the Netherlands and the Belgian, they're getting it up. But Russia and Switzerland, Morris has not mentioned them. Maybe he will, but I don't know. 20 years later, new mills churned out yarn and cloth in the Habsburg Empire, Denmark, Italy, Egypt, and Spain. And by 1860, mills could be found throughout Europe, North America, India, Mexico, and Brazil. Now, Morris has already told us all of this. While that year, the United Kingdom still controlled 67.4% of the world's mechanized spindles, cotton spinning machines. Oh, okay, let me reread this. Hey, Robin. Oh, yes, grocery orders. I did that yesterday. Let me read this again. I butchered that sentence. So each new spinning mill served as an example to entrepreneurial neighbors. You guys, I'm a hot mess today. I'm reading the wrong paragraph. Okay. 1860, the United Kingdom has 67.4% of the world's mechanized spindles. Cotton spinning by machines had effectively replaced older ways of doing things in large areas of the world. The world's mechanized cotton industry was remarkable not only for its rapid global dispersion, but also for its feverish rate of growth. Each new spinning mill served as an example to entrepreneurial neighbors that profits awaited those who could master the new world of cotton manufacturing. Belgian industrialism, without precedent in continental Europe in the first decade of the 19th century, was an example of this growth. In Ghent alone, its center, there had been only 227 cotton spinners in 1802, but 6 years later, there were already 2,000 such workers. Now remember, Morris said very similar things about the cotton production in Britain, different parts of England where, you know, I remember there was one where it was like a community of like 2,000 people ended up with 30,000 people working in this production after a few years. So it's like these little population centers are just exploding. So 6 years later, there were already 2,000 such workers, with an additional 1,000 laboring in the surrounding countryside. The number of spindles in the German lands increased from 22,000 in 1800 to 2 million in 1860. Catalonia saw an exponential growth of its cotton industry as well, so much so that it became known as the Little England in the heart of Spain, with nearly 800,000 spindles turning in 1861. By 1828, 9 spinning mills had opened in Russia, and by the middle of the 19th century, Russia had become self-sufficient in cotton textiles. I'd never heard this before. It's just, you don't associate, cotton textiles necessarily with Russia. Although it's not clear to me that they were exporting anything. I think they were really just able to take care of themselves and their cotton needs. In Mexico, 25,000 spindles and 2,600 looms worked in its 58 mills by 1843. Now, we heard a lot about like early cotton work in Peru, but again, I don't think that Morris has really put a lot of information in here about Mexico necessarily. It was, more, further down in South America. And that was the ancient indigenous work with it. And again, maybe we just haven't gotten to that part of the book yet, but Sven is bringing up a whole lot of localities that Morris did not touch on at all. Okay, Switzerland counted 1.35 million spindles in 1857. Nearby, Alsace housed more than 500,000 mechanical spindles in 1828 and 859,300 in 1846. I mean, this is the kind of expansion that, I don't know. I mean, certainly we're capable of today, but I mean, think about new emerging technology like, I immediately think of like electric vehicles, all of the production of the different parts. I mean, the batteries, I think, are the biggest piece of it, but, so many existing car companies have invested in it. And so I think that the growth around electric vehicles is this massive uptick in manufacturers of the batteries, right? Like, that's where you're seeing the growth. Without COVID, you kind of wonder, would there be more like smaller entities, getting in the business? And I'm sure there are. It's just one of those things. It's obviously, electric batteries are, much more like complex than cotton. But, that's just what I'm thinking of in today's, maybe recycled fabrics, that would be a better comparison. Yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting. Looking at these numbers are just like huge, considering this is the 1800s. But like this was the Industrial Revolution. This is what it looked like. And then you get into the early 20th century, and you've got I don't know, Industrial Revolution 2.0, I guess. That's when you get like the factory, like the Henry Ford stuff. How do we take industrial work and make it more productive and make it faster and more organized? Okay, this is the last paragraph here. So in the United States, cotton mills opened in Rhode Island, 1790, New Jersey, 1791, Delaware, 1795, New Hampshire, 1803, New York, 1803, Connecticut, 1804, Maryland, where I am, 1810. In 1810, according to the U.S. Census, there were 269 cotton establishments in the United States with a total of 87,000 spindles. By 1860, there would be 5 million spindles, making cotton textiles the United States' most important manufacturing industry in terms of capital invested, workers employed, and net value of its product. So, now, I know Sven Beckert gets into it extensively in here, but, I mean, you think about, like, by 1863, when we're at war with ourselves, and think about what this means. By 1860, 5 million spindles, cotton is our, so important to our GDP. And remember, Sarah Hale really took some heat because she talked about the like economy and what was going on in the Industrial Revolution as being the primary catalyst for the Civil War, and not chattel slavery. And that, chattel slavery was terrible and it was bad, and it was, kind of listed there as reasons why brothers were fighting brothers. But, was the spark abolition, or was the spark capitalism? It's an interesting question. And I don't know that there's a right answer necessarily. And I also I think you can argue both sides of it. And honestly, from my perspective, it's both. But it is interesting to look and see, our perspective of that history and what, strife in our own country meant, and how, it's a very highly charged topic. I'm not going to get into it, but it's interesting to read these things and see what these authors and these people were researching and finding, and what they had to say about it versus what we in 2024 think about it. Or, I'm sorry, 2025. We're in 2025 now. What we think about it, and what kind of history we teach now. This has all been debated heavily the last few years. So, all right. Are you ready for the big chapter? So, as a reminder, we are reading The Heritage of Cotton by M.D.C. Crawford, otherwise known as Morris de Camp Crawford. I like to call him Morris because I like to feel like he's a friend. He, if you remember, was a fellow with the American Natural History Museum. I never get it right. And he worked for Women's Wear Daily, which was a trade publication. So he's a guy who knows textiles. Let's put it that way. We are on chapter 9, and chapter 9 is called 18th Century: The Age of the Machine. And we're following the chapter on England. So this will be where what I just read to you from Sven Beckert's book, this is where Morris has got to prove that his research was good in 1924 and it's still good now. So let's see. All right. Chapter 9, 18th Century, The Age of the Machine. Let's hydrate. Oh, I think there's some thread in my drink. How does that happen? I have thread clippings. Never come and eat dinner at my house. You will find thread in your meal. All right. Chapter 9, 18th Century, The Age of the Machine. There is some evidence that the first experiments in textile machinery and the application of power to machinery were made in the 17th century in continental Europe. It is doubtful, however, if the British inventors of the 18th century had any direct knowledge of these first hesitating essays, nor do they in any sense diminish the honor of the actual accomplishment. To all intents and purposes, the great industrial revolution begins in the Midland counties of England in the forepart of the 18th century and ends with the dawn of the 19th. There is no question that the entire movement centers around cotton. With two exceptions, every inventor was an Englishman, and the great majority were drawn from the ranks of the humblest textile workers. I don't know, Morris. Did Sven Beckert bust what you are saying here? In this period, practically every textile machine we use today was created. All subsequent efforts have been directed towards improving, enlarging, and coordinating these basic ideas. In this century, we see as well the first complete demonstration of the idea of the division of labor and serial production. That's interesting. Because we often think, serial production was, well, this is the first demonstration of it. But I guess Henry Ford is the one that really put all that into, I guess our modern idea of what it means, like a workday and production. One continental invention was, however, of such importance as to deserve special mention. The flyer, added to the Indian spinning wheel, which appears on the Saxony wheel and enters so largely into most types of modern mechanical spinning machinery, was the invention of Leonardo da Vinci, either in the latter portion of the 15th or the early part of the 16th century. That's interesting. It was probably invented to assist the Italian craftsmen and their followers in southern Germany to more successfully spin the cotton lint, which was then a regular article of trade between the Levant, the Italian cities, and the towns of Flanders. In the Journal des Savants, 1678, is an account of a machine to weave by power invented by an M. de Genlis, I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, a French naval officer, which does not appear to have attracted any attention at that time. There was as well a French device to supply power to 200 hand spinning wheels at a little later date, but no proof of its application in practical form. The great point about the English inventors was that they were practical artisans, devoting their attention to the actual production of definite and much-needed commodities. They were faced with the necessity of carrying theory into practice and testing ideas against facts. It is possible that the vigorous commerce of England in the 16th and 17th centuries may have more ruthlessly destroyed the weaving guilds than on the continent, and thus opened up the way for innovation. This is indicated by the greater specialization in textile production and the inclusion of workers in certain phases outside guild control. Hey, Jan! But of more importance was the character of the British textile population as compared to those of continental Europe. There was in the Midlands that mingling of closely related peoples of slightly different points of view and traditions, which so usually destroys prejudices and stimulates creative thought. Oh, you think so, do you? The history of textile devices before the machine age is not lacking in interest. Great changes had been made in the simple types borrowed from the Orient, and all of these changes had been of a mechanical nature, as aids to the production in quantity rather than in fineness of quality. Nor can we escape the thought that both the machine and the idea of power application are closely related to the mathematical philosophy and speculation of the age. Great inventions in all times are the fulfillment of processes of thought, not the starting point of thought. Now, this is interesting because think about this. Morris is writing in 1924. Computers are not a thing. At least, they're not. They're not a thing in 1924. The punch card technology that computers are gonna be, within a few decades are gonna be based on is related to weaving. But he doesn't know that yet. This is so funny. So what he's saying about, the idea of power application and mathematical philosophy. Somebody has called me and turned on. Okay. I think you probably could hear that. Let me turn this off. What happens is, if I forget to put my phone in airplane mode, somebody will call me or text me, and what it does is it decides that everything that's connected to my headset now needs to be turned on and things done. So I'm gonna put that on airplane mode. Should have done that earlier. It's always something, you guys. Always something. Okay. Where did we leave off? Okay. Great inventions at all times are the fulfillment of processes of thought, not the starting point of thought. There is little direct evidence to prove the point, but a strong assumption exists that both the two-barred loom and the spinning wheel were borrowed from the East. Strong assumptions. Okay. I thought we had already really... Well, I guess maybe not the spinning wheel. I know in India, they have something called I think it's called a charka. No. It's not a chakra. Chakras are the things, the energy centers in your body. I think it's called a charka. And it's like this, I don't know, it's this like flat little spinning wheel thing. I've seen some spinners that had one. And I think that's like an ancient technology out of India. So... yeah, I don't know. Let's keep going. Hey, a nun maker. Somehow I thought if I brought up something like that, you might be around. So thank you for lurking, and thank you for... yeah, so it is a charka. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. I think charka is the way I've heard it pronounced. But yes. And isn't it... it's almost like... it kind of reminds you of like... I don't know what I saw a person who had one. It looked like a case almost, like, you know, you got your briefcase and you open it up and, you know, today you're like, oh, it's a spot. It's a computer in there. And as it turns out, it's a little spinning wheel. It is always great to have you here. And I always wonder if you're around when I mention like some weaving or spinning. I'm not weaving, but like spinning and knitting stuff, because I'm like, a nun maker knows this stuff. There are pictures of Ghanaians. Oh, interesting. Okay. So, little direct evidence, but a strong assumption. And I think that Gandhi. Okay. Of Gandhi spinning on one. Okay. I was like, the people in Ghana? Okay. Gandhi. Interesting. I'll have to look for that. That'll be interesting. Yeah. Because, again, the only one that I've ever seen was just a contemporary person that I think they were spinning maybe for lace making. I can't remember. But yeah. Stupid autocorrect. I know. I feel like my autocorrect has gotten worse. Anyway. Okay. There is unquestioned proof that all through Northern Europe, the warp-weighted loom prevailed and existed in some remote regions even down to our times. Our own times being 1924. But, you know, those warp-weighted, so not necessarily warp-weighted. Well, I guess those ones that they're stretching out across the ground versus hanging, I guess it's still, I don't know if that would really be considered warp-weighted. I talked about, it was back in an earlier chapter, I talked about a thing I had seen that was contemporary. And I think it was in Afghanistan. It was an Afghani family. And they were nomadic because they had, you know, their camels, and they needed to rebraid like a strap for, you know, part of the camel's like bridle, whatever. It's like, I think it was some kind of thing on the side. And the way that they wove that is, I mean, the thing is only like so wide. It's like just a strap, but they stretched this warp across their yard, you know, between these two stakes in the ground. And then the family members would just come by and weave, you know, in between other chores. So I don't know if, like, did Morris give that kind of thing a name? I don't remember that he did. So I guess it's not really backstrap. it's not, definitely not warp weighted loom. I don't know. There probably was an explanation of that, and I just am glossing over it. But okay, moving right along. In the fragmentary records of early Europe, no mention of the spinning wheel occurs, but the primitive distaff and whirl method is occasionally referred to. Just when the loom was introduced, it is difficult to say. The 14th century silk loom of England surely looks enough like the Indian loom to have been a recent introduction, but it may have come into Europe at a much earlier period, possibly even during Roman times. I mean, there's a big stretch between Rome and 14th century England. I mean, we've got some hundreds of years, right? As a general rule, all European textile implements were heavier than their Eastern originals, and at a very early date, we find them growing more complicated in mechanical detail. I think that's probably absolutely true because, again, like the Indian charka is a little flat thing, whereas European textile, I mean, we're getting industrialized and they're making bigger things that can handle more stuff. This is an interesting indication of the first dawning of technical consciousness, which in no small degree accounts for our material ascendancy over all Oriental cultures. Material ascendancy over Oriental cultures. I don't know if I'm necessarily liking that. And while it emphasizes our craft inferiority, perhaps it illustrates at the same time a higher receptivity for mechanical reasoning. I don't know if he's really being insulting there or not. I can't decide. Okay. The first concrete expression of the machine age was the fly shuttle of John Kay of Bury, son of a small woolen manufacturer of Colchester. I have included a detailed draft of the device in another portion of the narrative and will therefore only briefly describe its effects upon weaving rather than enter into a too technical description of its parts. Depictions of looms in ancient Egyptian art. They are more like tapestry looms. Okay. Well, I mean, really, a tapestry loom is essentially not any different than, say, a backstrap loom. You know, it's the warp. And making tapestry is not a whole lot different than weaving necessarily, in my opinion. I have woven tapestry. So, you know, when you're just weaving cloth, you're going, you know, back and forth. With tapestry, you're kind of weave in sections. But it, I mean, essentially is, you know, the over and under, or, you know, in sets of over and under. So, yeah. But yeah, that makes sense to me that, you know, I think Morris has made his point that people were weaving stuff way back, you know. I mean, I think it really didn't take much to organize, you know, once people figured it out. And I think about animals that weave besides spiders. You know, I mean, I think about sometimes the way that birds make their nests. You see ones that are clearly more sophisticated than just putting a bunch of sticks in a pile. You know what I mean? So I kind of wonder if, you know, and then there's no way to prove it necessarily, you know, without any evidence. But, you know, I wonder if some of the like early human beings were looking at things and thinking to themselves, well, that looks like it's a good idea what that bird's doing right there. I digress. Okay. Before Kay's invention, the shuttle, which is the wooden container of the bobbin of weft, was passed through the opening of the warps from one hand to the other, while the pressure of the feet opened the alternating sheds. So, if you were with me and Jill at our last Stitch and Glitch, I tried to mess around with this little plastic clover desktop loom, and like the way it works, you have basically one shed. You could pull that shed open with this little stick, so it opens up and you could pass your shuttle through. But when you want to do the other one, you have no way without pulling that stick out and weaving it through the other way. So you had to actually use your needle to weave through. So I think that is the interesting technology, is being able to open the shed, you know, different parts of the shed, or different sheds. I don't know. Sorry, Anon Maker, I used the wrong words. Consequently, the width of cloth was limited to the reasonable spread between the outstretched hands of the weaver. Since the weaver had to operate the battern or beating up frame of wires as well after each shot of weft, it will be seen that weaving was a rather slow process. So yeah, you have to smash the the thread down, the weft down. It will be seen that weaving was a rather slow process. Kay wished to make possible the weaving of the broad fabrics of India and to conserve the labor time of his weavers. In perfecting this device, he changed the shape of the shuttle and made certain practical additions to the loom, which prove him to have been not only a man of imagination, but of unusual mechanical skill. His perfected invention was greeted with angry protests from both weavers and masters alike, and he was driven from his house and eventually settled in Leeds. Here, his fly shuttle was shamelessly stolen by the manufacturers of woolens, and all compensations denied him. Shuttle clubs were formed, and each member pledging himself to help defend any member sued by Kay. Oh my, I was getting a little confrontational up in there. In the end, though, never losing a suit, he was impoverished and discouraged by his many appearances in court. Returned to Bury to work as a millwright and a machinist. Here, his inventive genius led him to perfect a spinning machine. Well, this guy doesn't stop. It is believed that in many ways his invention anticipated those of Arkwright and Crompton. Okay. Again, misfortune pursued him, and he fell a victim to that mad fear of all mechanical devices, which pervaded textile England at this time. Okay, a fear of mechanical devices, despite the fact he was a mechanical device inventor. Okay. Kay's spinning machine was destroyed and his life saved only through a hasty and secret retreat. Oh, so it's not his fear. It's the mad fear in general. It's the saboteurs coming to destroy the... Okay. I misunderstood. So he sought refuge in France, where he died in poverty in 1764. So his spinning machine was destroyed. Poor old John Kay. Okay. It has been estimated that Kay's fly shuttle increased the average production of a loom fourfold. Even before this time, and that's good, right? If you could weave something 4 times faster, that makes a big difference. Even before this time, there had been a great shortage of cotton weft yarn. Spinning was largely an intermittent occupation of women and children in the small agricultural hamlets, while weaving was becoming more and more the steady occupation of a masculine artisan craft. It took about 3 spinners to supply enough yarn for a single weaver, and when loom production was multiplied by 4, there arose a dangerous shortage. Well, that makes sense. If you're making your raw material by hand and you can't do it as fast as you can do your next step of production, then yeah, you're screwed unless you figure something out. It must be remembered that at this time there was great activity in the production of British calicos and an increasing demand for the rough cotton and linen fabrics, all of which made Kay's improved loom of the greatest economic importance. It could not, however, reach its fullest value until adequate supplies of weft yarn were obtainable. Attention, therefore, turned to some device to increase the productivity of the spinning wheel. There is even a record of a small reward being offered for such a machine. It will be seen that such a machine, or rather the idea of such a machine, could not have been any too pleasant to hand spinners. You know, it's funny, if I may digress for just a moment. And I was actually just having this conversation with somebody about AI. And, you know, those of us who worked in both creative and, well, I mean, image generation and writing. Let's put it that way. Image generation and writing. So you've got graphic designers, you've got writers. My job, which is my profession is an oddball mix-up of like web design, graphic design, audio stuff, and instruction, curriculum. All of those things are starting to be taken over by AI. Now, do they do it well? Most of the time, no, not at this point. But as an example, I have a couple of friends who are graphic designers, and they've been out of work a while because nobody wants to hire graphic designers. They're like, I can get all this crap off of Canva. So this is exactly what we're hearing here. Industrialization is not good for the people that did this by hand. They've been replaced. So in the same way that information workers, people that, summarize and write, and I was just saying today, like, part of my job over the past 20 years in terms of teaching would be, say, like as an example, an electrician's apprenticeship course. I worked, oh, no lie, on and off for like 7 years on an apprenticeship program for a major union, electricians union. And, we were taking their textbooks, and we're talking textbooks, and it's math and it's all kinds of stuff. And we were summarizing that stuff and figuring out how to, like, not dumb it down, but make it, more easily digestible in an online training forum. That kind of work can be done by AI now, and can be done well. A PDF of that book can be fed right into AI, and it can be told, take chapter 1, summarize it, come up with like 10 discussion questions and 20 true or false questions. And will it be perfect? No. Somebody like me would have to review it and make sure that it didn't make a mistake, and it didn't, the stuff it came up with was quality, and that might involve a rewrite. But my job has become even more of an edit job than a creation job, because AI is doing the creating and I'm just doing the editing. So it's really interesting to say that we're in a position right now with some of our professions, just like the professions of people that were making handcrafted things for consumption, now had to contend with machines making those things more quickly. Yeah, it's amazing. This kind of stuff, it's the oldest, these are the oldest stories. They just keep happening over and over as we keep getting more advanced. Okay. So the hand spinners are not too happy. Nor can it be said that the English worker of that day had any aversion to resorting to the cowardly method of mob law to destroy his fancied enemies. An inventor was regarded in about the same way as an abolitionist was a half century or so later in the South. The first mechanical spinning device to make more than a single yarn was the roller frame of John Wyatt. This consisted of 2 sets of rollers operating at different rates of speed, which partially formed the roving, the preliminary process in yarn making. So it's like your big chunk. So it's like you don't have a big sheet of it, you got a big chunk of it, and that big chunk is going to be stretched out and twisted, right? That's the roving. It's a big chunk. Associated with Wyatt was Louis Paul, a German, who had invented a crude carding device consisting of a semicircular receptacle studded with wire points in which revolved a wooden cylinder covered with wire nails. We still use those today. Small, like especially in the wool production, small wool factories. No, like, people that own flocks of sheep and make their own stuff. That's a very common device that you would see in a hand wool processing. This machine separated the fibers and laid them parallel. Neither of these machines had any immediate value, although both contained the sound principles which were later perfected by other inventors and incorporated in their machines. The first wholly practical spinning machine was the Jenny of James Hargreaves, a modest cottage weaver of Stanhill. Now, we know about the spinning Jenny, and we know about James Hargreaves. His name comes up all the time. You've got the spinning Jenny, and then you've got like the cotton gin. These are names that James Hargreaves and Eli Whitney. So he had such great difficulty in obtaining sufficient weft yarn of cotton for his busy loom, in competition with the merchant manufacturers of Lancashire, that he made experiments with spinning wheels to increase his supply. His device gives evidence of a fine practical imagination and sound understanding of the principles of spinning. It consisted of a stout frame of wood supporting 2 racks of spindles, one containing the partially spun roving, still made by hand or on some modification of John Wyatt's rollers, and the other to receive the finished yarn. From the roving spindles at the rear of the frame, a carriage drew out the yarn while the spindles revolved. Both passage of carriage and the drive of the spindles were controlled by a wheel with a belt or cord attached to pulleys and gears. When the yarn had been spun, the carriage traveled forward and the yarn spindles wound it up. I can't quite envision what's happening in this description, but it sounds to me like you've got spindles, right? And then you've got this carriage thing that's pulling it out while they're revolving, and then the carriage comes back to wind the yarn up. And then this whole kind of thing. And I guess it is, to me, just, again, based on this description and not seeing it in action, it really does sound like a very mechanized action of what a hand spinner using a, like, you know, old-fashioned spindle with the whirl would be doing. You're taking your roving and you're pulling it and spinning it. This is just a bunch of contraptions that are doing the same thing and winding it up and doing the same thing. I think there's a picture of this in here, I think. This machine is easier to describe than to operate. Oh, is it? Okay. And must have required great skill on the part of the worker. What is happening here? Sorry, guys. Oh, and unmake. I wish you could demonstrate. I wish you could too. If you are ever up for it, you are more than welcome to come on here and tell us things. So easier to describe than operate. It must have required great skill on the part of the worker. It could only spin a rather coarse, weak weft yarn. Nonetheless, since it contained at first 8 and later 16 spindles, it vastly increased the output of yarn and aroused the jealous wrath of the hand spinners. In the year 1767, a mob broke into his home, wrecked his machine, and drove him from town in fear for his life. He settled in Nottingham, where a lack of interest in textiles made him safe from molestation. Oh my gosh, that might be one of the... That's almost as good as a chinsult. Bear with me one moment while I mark that, because that is just a hilarious little... No, there's lack of interest in textiles in Nottingham, therefore... That's a good one. Okay. In order to earn enough money to begin his life anew, he secretly made a few machines for the more powerful merchant manufacturers of his vicinity, and this fact made it impossible for him to maintain his patent in a lawsuit a few years later. It is a satisfaction to write that in spite of this, he was reasonably successful in his business, and when he died in 1778, left his family in easy circumstances. So things were better for James Hargreaves than they were for John... What was his name? John Kay. Okay. We now come to the man who, though in one sense was not a great inventor, still did most to establish the cotton and, in fact, all other textile industries on the modern basis. The genius of Richard Arkwright was wholly practical. In organization, as in adaptation, he was far in advance of his times, and he stands happily in no need of pity, since nature and training had endowed him with a shrewd common sense and energy adequate to his needs. He is properly regarded as the father of the cotton mills of today and the prototype of the modern mill treasurer. He was born December 23rd, 1732, in the beautiful city of Preston, began life as a barber, and later became an itinerant buyer of hair for wig makers. Okay, so this guy was going door to door. Have you any hair? Of a clear investigative mind, he absorbed all the wild talk he heard going from one weaving town to another in regard to the great and mysterious machines. Unlike his acquaintances, he did not regard these rumors as evil or visionary, but strove to marshal them to the advantage of that excellent young hair merchant, Richard Arkwright. He was familiar with Wyatt's spinning rollers. He probably saw every day of his life the spinning jenny of Hargreaves and many other partially successful devices and experiments. In his fertile mind, all of these facts, fancies, and conjectures became ideas. Gosh, it really sounds like Morris loved Arkwright. Incapable of actually working out his ideas, he guardedly sought the aid of expert clockmakers, giving each a separate part to make and assembling these unassisted. Oh, sneaky, sneaky Arkwright. When you give each of them a part, they don't have information about the whole. It is said that Arkwright received little domestic encouragement. His wife, a practical woman, fearing to spoil a good barber in making a bad mechanic, is reputed to have destroyed his first models in an attempt to cure his madness. Oh my goodness. Arkwright is interesting. Okay. He persisted nonetheless and at last formed a partnership in 1769 with Jedediah Strutt, the well-known inventor of the stocking frame. Now, I'm wondering, is the stocking frame, is that like a sock knitting machine? I feel like that could be what he's referring to. I don't know what else a stocking frame would be. With the support and aid of Strutt, he so far perfected his device as to patent it. He then proceeded to build and organize his first mill in Cromford, which was completed in 1771. Here, the real genius of the man shows clearly. Each process of manufacture underwent his careful scrutiny. He changed the details of practice, coordinated parts to improve the product and increase the yield. He discovered, or rather proved, how the skill and productivity of each workman and each group increased with specialization. This is all the stuff that Henry Ford then worked out and, applied to his factory model. But it's interesting to me that, here in the U.S., of course, Henry Ford, the factory process. But it seems to me like so many of these textile guys, they were already doing this. They had already recognized that instead of having one person doing all the steps from A to H, you have one person doing A and you have one person doing B. And then they can get specialized and improve their skill in that, and they don't have to worry about these other steps. So it seems to me that these guys were doing this far longer, or, long before Henry Ford. So that's interesting. When we go back and Henry Ford, I keep thinking of him because of industrialization. But if you remember when we were talking about Sarah Hale, Henry Ford was responsible for holding on to that story about where Mary Had a Little Lamb came from. And so clearly Henry Ford liked to take responsibility for these factory models, that maybe what he did increase productivity, but he did not come up with this on his own. This is clear to me based on what Morris is saying here. So, okay. More than this, he carefully correlated each machine with the functions of the preceding and following machines. In other words, he grouped in one unit all the most advanced devices for spinning cotton yarn and welded them into a factory. The sum total of his efforts was a spinning mill, which could easily and constantly undersell all competitors. His famous spinning frame, driven by water power, was the first to make cotton warp as well as weft, and thus to his genius we owe the first all-cotton fabrics made entirely from European spun yarn. So successful was he that a second mill was built, the Maison, on the Derwent in 1775, a year before the Revolution. I guess the Derwent is a river. I've never heard of it. Arkwright and his partners were too powerful to be intimidated by mobs. Consequently, rival manufacturers simply hired away his trained assistants and, as far as possible, imitated his machines, including the use of water as a motive power. He endured this until 1781, when he at last resorted to legal action. The case was bitterly contested by both parties. It was proved, however, that Arkwright's machines were but combinations of other devices, the theft of which had been sanctified by time, and he lost his case in 1785 under rather peculiar circumstances. It was, so Quiltish, I think you're confirming the Derwent. Is that what it was? Yeah, the Derwent is a river. Okay. It was not possible, however, to steal his natural ability and energy. He was so much better both as a manufacturer and a businessman than any of his rivals, that he died in 1792, 2 years after the first successful American mill was built by one of his former workmen. He was a millionaire. Okay. We had a lot of mills here in Maryland. Now, they weren't necessarily making fabric. They did eventually, but we had the flour mills were the first. Of all the famous names in this brief epic of invention, none has a more romantic or indeed pathetic significance than that of Samuel Crompton. Romantic, yet so pathetic. Craftsman and musician, mechanic and dreamer, his invention it was which gave to Britain manufacturers that final control over the difficult art of fine cotton spinning, which made England the world's dominant figure in this industry. For it was his mule, so called because of its relationship to Arkwright's first horsepower frame and Hargreaves' jenny, that made it possible to spin fine yarns, strong enough to weave into lighter grades of cotton fabrics suitable for the best calicos. Before we briefly consider the character of this remarkable invention, a single incident may go to prove how close we are to this entire age of revolutionary invention. In Bolton, England, there is today an ancient and gracious manor house, carefully preserved through the generosity of Lord Leverhulme as a charming museum. It is known in the quaint Lancastrian dialect as Hall in the Wood, or Hall in the Woods. I'm sure people from Lancashire would throw rocks at me right now. It was once the home of Samuel Crompton and is today a memorial to his genius. Built in 3 periods, 1480, 1556, and 1668, each wing has been restored and furnished in perfect taste and in accordance with its period. I wonder if this place is still open. Hall in the Woods in Lancashire. Before these spacious fireplaces, with mechanical clockwork to turn the hospitable spits. Is hospitable the word you want to use when you're describing a spit? Hospitable spit. May well have come some fog-bound traveler with strange tales of the voyage of Portuguese da Gama round the stormy Cape of Good Hope, and his safe return to Lisbon, cargoed with rare essences and cotton of exquisite beauty, or some tale of the bold adventure of our great Genoese beyond the bleak Atlantic to the other Indies, one day to become so vital in English history. When these events took place, the oldest wing had hardly reached the middle of its second decade. It must not be supposed that in Crompton's time it was a home of wealth and elegance. The ancient manor had fallen upon evil days and was the dilapidated tenement of the poor. His room, the fireplace he sat before in suspended dreams, even his chair with the broad arm for writing and drawing have been carefully preserved. Oh, it is open! Quiltish. Oh, awesome. Yeah. Here there hangs a portrait of an oval, sensitive face, a cup of yarn he spun. Let me say that again. Here there hangs a portrait of an oval, sensitive face, a cup of yarn he spun, and the memory of that great struggle and triumph which no later tragedy might deny him. This is all. His machine is guarded in the British Museum, and his fame lives in British history. Within a few years of this writing, there were in Bolton 2 ancient men who as children had lived in the Hall in the Woods. They remembered a shabby gentleman who enjoyed the unusual privilege of wandering about their garden, for they had been told that he was Mr. Crompton, the inventor. So within the reach of one long life does this vigorous age touch the man whose genius did so much to build it. Crompton's invention, perfected in 1779, was indeed a combination of the rollers of Wyatt, the Jenny of Hargreaves, a small one which he possessed and used, serving as a model, and the practical machine of Arkwright, known only through repute. But the combination thus inspired was a stroke of pure creative genius. Since his time, master mechanics and machine builders have lavished on his invention all of their increasing knowledge of metals and fiber and power application. Nor have there been lacking additions of great merit. Yet, in principle and indeed in appearance, it is as he first perfected it in his young manhood. Nor was there ever any machine which combined the virtue of vast production while still retaining the delicacy of hand-directed operation. No better description of the early mule is possible than that contained in Murphy's excellent work, The Textile Industries. So let's see, is there a picture of this stuff? Yeah, we'll look at these later. So this is from The Textile Industries. Having heard of Arkwright's roller spinning frame, though without knowledge of its structure, Crompton set himself to improving the spinning jenny, introducing the roller spinning principle as an aid in attenuating the rove. On the head of the frame, he placed the roving creel, and in front of 2 pairs of drawing rollers, he mounted the spindles on a carriage capable of being moved to and fro. As will be evident, this was a complete reversal of the motions of the spinning jenny. John Kennedy, a Manchester manufacturer, the alliteration is killing me, and friend of Crompton, accurately described the chief merit of the mule, as it came to be named, in a paper delivered by him to the Manchester Philosophical Society in 1830. Oh, awesome. So Anon Maker says there are YouTube videos of all 3 of these machines. Okay, so I don't think we'll have time to look at that today, but next week I can look for those, and we can look at this and figure out, like, so that we understand what he's describing. And then we've got the pictures here. The great and important invention of Crompton was his spindle carriage, and the principle of the thread having no strain upon it until it was completed. Oh, I think, and again, Anon Maker, correct me if I'm wrong, that is one of the challenges of cotton, in that it doesn't have, like, so when you spin wool has those microscopic barbs in the hair that make it kind of want to grip together and hold itself. And additionally, you can get pretty long strands of wool. So you when you spin it together as thread, it's not going to pull apart as easily. But cotton is it's slippery kind of, and the pieces are shorter. I think they break more easily than wool. Yeah, short staple length is the big difficulty. Yeah, so as you get finer and finer and finer, it's really easy to pull cotton apart. And I'm sure you have seen some kind of cotton that, like, the fibers could come off of it. So you have to spin it very tightly, very quickly. That makes sense. Yeah. And I'm guessing that, well, and they haven't said they do this here, and I don't think they do this in the actual mechanical stuff, but I think it was the Peruvians and maybe the Mexican spinners would set their spindle so that the cotton kind of ran through some water to kind of get it wet, I think I remember them talking about that in here. So yes, you don't spin cotton. I know that's the funny thing. I do know a number of spinners, and they all are like, oh, cotton's the worst. I'll just buy my cotton already spun if I want to knit or, crochet or weave with cotton, because, ugh. So the carriage with the spindles could, by the movement of the hand and knee, recede just as the rollers delivered out the elongated thread in a soft state, so that it would allow of a considerable stretch before the thread had to encounter the stress of winding on the spindle. This was the cornerstone of the merits of his invention. There is no record I have discovered that tells how fine in count were the yarns spun on Arkwright's water frame. They are simply referred to as coarse and heavy. We do know, however, a few years later in America, on an adaptation of his machine, number 14 and number 20 were spun. So I'm wondering, so number 14, if he's talking about these numbers are the same as what we know of cotton thread now, 14 would be a little bit finer than, say, like a top stitch thread. Top stitch thread is often often 12. 12 is also about the same like thickness as a strand of embroidery floss that would have like a piece of embroidery floss that has all 6 strands in it. If you twisted that tightly, you're getting around the size of 12. 20 is a little bit heavier than like quilting thread. Quilting thread goes between 30 and 50. 50 is when you're getting down into like kind of nicer for applique, although applique is really good at 80. Those really thin, fine little threads. So this is interesting to me that these are still pretty chunky. You know, you can't get cotton lawn out of size 14 thread. But again, I don't know if these numbers correlate to what we would consider today to be. I don't know. I think they probably are, but unless he elaborates more, I don't know. Oh, wait, I probably should have read more. These yarns correspond to our heavy butcher linen or coarse muslins. Okay, yeah, that probably sounds about right. I would say if you were to take 20 thread, that probably would be like a chunky, yeah, we're talking about like really chunky stuff. Not as coarse and chunky as say like burlap, but kind of heavy like that. Okay. Crompton himself made good even number 80s, comparable in weight to the yarns used in fine laws and nainsook. I know we've heard that word before. For some reason, I feel like that had to do with silk, but I could be wrong. So 80s, yes. 80 thread is what, those of you that know Aurifil, Aurifil makes a really nice 80 weight thread that used for applique. You don't want to pull off too long of a piece of it because by the time you get to the middle of it, the friction of applique is going to cause it to shred. And you could definitely see, like, when cotton thread gets weak, it'll just pull apart. Okay. The hand mule, up to our own time, was used to make the delicate yarn used in the Calais lace trade, and I have modern specimens as fine as 405s or 260,200 yards to the pound, or approximately 150 miles. Okay. 405s, I don't know what that means necessarily. I don't know if that's something that is relevant today or not. I have also a cup of number 500 spun for the Jubilee Exposition of Queen Victoria a generation ago. So, well, I mean, he's giving numbers here. So number 500 would be like more than 5 times as fine as a number 80. And number 80 is pretty fine. So, I mean, is a number 500 like, are we talking spider silk here? Are we talking like spider web kind of stuff? Single strands of cotton fiber that are just loosely held together. I don't know. These facts will prove how exquisitely perfect was the original mule for its purpose. Crompton was as much the victim of his own sensitive nature as of the sordid greed of his contemporaries. His invention was stolen from him through unredeemed promises of reward and threats against his safety. Long after his invention had brought wealth to many manufacturers, he lived in want as a spinner craftsman, attempting to support a large family of young children. In 1812, a subscription of about £500 was taken up and a petition presented to Parliament to give him $20,000 in tardy recognition of his great services. But Spencer Perceval, the Premier of England, I wonder if he was any relation to MacGyver Percival, on the very morning of presenting the memorial, was assassinated in the House of Parliament, and then the bill was finally placed before the House. It had been reduced to $5,000. It's not funny, but like, what? That sounds like the worst. You're like, yes, he promised me $20,000. Yes! And then the guy gets assassinated. And the house is like, $20,000 sounds like too much, Spencer Percival, but you're dead, so you have nothing to say about it. $5,000 is all you get, Crompton. This modest sum Crompton lost in a business venture and lived in his old age on an annuity provided by his later friends, and he died in 1827. So, quilters is saying would be like 500 thread count Egyptian cotton sheets. But the thing, so my question there is the 500 thread count means there's 500 threads to an inch, right? It's 500 threads to some measurement, and I think it's an inch. But does that mean that the thread itself is 500? Thank you for your subscription, Tish, and also for confirming that is exactly what you meant. Oh my goodness. Thank you. We got Butterick Lady. I love her. Okay. As soon as the mule became known, successful efforts were made to increase the efficiency. First one detail and then another was improved. As early as 1790, a Mr. Kelly, strangely located on the River Clyde. I wonder why that's strange. How did you do that, Tish? I don't know. Did you not just re-up your subscription? Twitch is just like, yeah, okay. You know what? Actually, you know what I bet it was? Sometimes the chat, I remember this happening a lot of times when I was watching Mary and, just being there. What happens is you'll get this thing where it wants you to promote the fact that you've just resubscribed or you're still subscribed, and it's in your little chat box. And so I guess if it didn't show you that clearly, then you just typed in yes and it gave you the whole thing. So it doesn't matter. We got to see Dancing Lady, and I got a chance to thank you for your subscription. So all good. Okay, I don't understand why as early as 1750 Mr. Kelly, that it's strange he's located on the River Clyde, but so a Mr. Kelly applied water power and by an arrangement of taut and slack pulleys made the movement continuous. So I guess this is no longer having to throw a shuttle, but this back and forth thing gets totally automated. Is that what he's saying? I'm assuming. I don't know. For all its marvelous precision of motion, the mule required highly skilled labor, and none knew better their value than the mule spinners. They were the haughty aristocrats of the textile trades, demanding high wages and very special privileges. It is narrated that they wore $5 notes in the bands of their hats and would neither drink nor smoke in the common room of the inns. I love it. I'm going to go around with a $5 note tucked into my hat. Oh, I love it. Worse than this, in the eyes of their supposed masters, they refused to train apprentices unless at their own caprice. Even to this day, the strongest craft union in England is that of the mule spinners. Interesting. Well, and this was 100 years ago, 101 years ago. So I'm guessing that mule spinners in the craft unions of England are no longer the highest paid people in the land. In desperation, the baffled manufacturers turned for aid to the great mechanical adapter Richard Roberts. After 5 years of experiment, he produced in 1830 the modern self-actor mule, and since this machine could be operated by less skilled mechanics, the arrogance of the early craftsmen was in a measure curbed. Okay, so answered my question. There is but a single name to add to the list of the great inventors, that of Edmund Cartwright, graduate of Oxford, clergyman, writer, and inventor of the power loom. And I think Cartwright is another one of those names that's just like Hargreaves and Eli Whitney. We know his name. I want to say that MacGyver Percival might have brought him up in the Chintz book. I feel like I'm remembering his name from that. I have already mentioned the drawing power of a loom by Degens in France in the 17th century. The two barbers in Scotland in the latter half of the 18th century also made unsuccessful experiments. It is doubtful, however, if he knew of either of his predecessors. He was a man of independent means with a gift for mechanics, which in a poorer man had surely reaped a greater reward. He made his first power loom in 1785 and later made a second improved model. Neither was wholly successful, the movement that shot the shuttle between sheds being dangerous and violent, often destroying the warps and occasionally blinding the weaver. Oh my God. This is not funny, you guys, but holy Moses. Look at this. Look at my fantastic invention. It's only a little dangerous. Only about 5 or 10 weavers have been blinded. Wow. This is why we have OSHA, Edmund. This is why we have OSHA. Okay. Cartwright, at last tired of his experiment with looms, turned his attention to a wool comber, then to a dough mixer, the principle of which is still in force in bakeries, and finally to agricultural implements far in advance of his age. Okay. He seems to have been an amiable, busy man, delighting in mechanical experiment, but not particularly gifted with the persistence essential to success. In 1808, he petitioned Parliament to grant him the £30,000 he had spent on the power loom, and actually received £10,000 in recognition of his services. Well, sounds better than what they did to, was it Arkwright? Yeah, I think that was Arkwright. Crompton. I'm sorry. Crompton was the one that only got the $5,000. Okay. Dr. Jeffrey of Paisley, Scotland, and Andrew Kinloch of Glasgow also made experiments in the same direction. Manufacturers very soon adopted this machine, and in 1812, the machine-breaking riots were especially directed against it. All that machine breaking, my goodness. It remained, however, for W.H. Horrocks and the famous Richard Roberts to bring this machine to something nearer its present perfection. The great textile inventions outside of England were the cotton gin of Eli Whitney in the United States, to be fully described in a later chapter, which I believe is unfortunately the one about chattel slavery. And the mechanical pattern loom of Jean-Marie Jacquard of France, of more importance to silk than to cotton. As remarkable as was this later machine, it cannot be classed as a truly original creation, since it is very close to a Chinese loom of the 12th century, pictures of which were no doubt known in France because of the broad interest in l'art chinois of the time. My attempts at French are terrible. The invention of roller printing from engraved copper rollers by Thomas Bell has already been mentioned. The next century in England and America was indeed a period of hectic invention, but it was directed towards the perfection of detail, the enlargement of the earlier types, the speeding up of machinery, and the coordination of all the mechanical devices together with an almost complete elimination of hand processes. The first machines were largely concerned with the final processes and had to be supported by a great amount of hand work. It is necessary to radically change the human element in relationship to production as well as to modify the machines. The craftsmen of that time fully realized what the machines meant to them in an economic way, and bitterly and not always unwisely opposed them. The tendency in invention was to break down the last resistance of old crafts and to so arrange production that less and less skill was necessary in labor. Can I again point this to where we're at right now? You know, a traditional graphic designer would go to school for a number of years to learn, design principles and how to use design software and, a lot of other stuff like that. And today we just go canva.com. I want to make a PowerPoint. Again, less skill in the labor. Consequently, lower and lower wages could be forced through the competition of the unskilled with the skilled, and ultimately children against adults. This change was accompanied with conditions of human misery beyond belief nor was it confined to the textile industries. Production in other fields rapidly followed cotton in the use of machinery and the intense specialization of labor functions. James Watt's steam engine vastly aided this condition and is indeed a vital part of all modern industry. All that fine sense of interclass responsibilities, so sympathetically described by Froude or Froude, it's not Freud, it's Froude, so Froude, in his essay, 16th Century Englishmen, was swept aside and its place taken by confused theories of personal liberty, free competition in commodities, and in the lives of men and women. Okay. It's a little after 4 o'clock my time, and ordinarily I would keep going. There's a couple of pages left, but today I actually have a meeting I have to get to right after this. Therefore, I'm going to stop right here because it does start talking about, a little bit more modern, and it talks a little bit about human conditions. So let's take a look at that next week, and I'm going to say Monday. We'll take a look. We'll finish this chapter, and then we'll look for those. I'll find them. Those videos on YouTube so we can see this stuff in action. And you know what? I do actually know somebody who has some really good videos, and it's Rabbit Goody. And I don't know if Jill and I have mentioned her extensively, but she is. I took a workshop from her, or a study center from her at seminar this year. She basically got into weaving at some point in her life, and now runs a little cottage industry of weaving looms, like these old looms and she's making fabrics that we just don't have today. And like some of her customers are, obviously people that want to have, something like special, but like movies and film that want to see things, very traditional. Rabbit will weave that stuff for them. So I think we'll definitely look at her videos, and they're short. And then we'll look for some of these other ones that Anon Maker mentioned. So, this is exciting. Mechanical stuff. I don't know if you guys have ever watched like those How It's Made shows, and the thing is going really fast, and then they slow it down, and you're like, that's how lemon heads are made. I love those. So, all right, you guys. Druid, I hope that you don't get that much snow, and I hope you stay warm and make lots of soup. Thank you, Robin. Yeah, you guys have a wonderful weekend. I hope if you are able, and let's hope Jill's health is going to make it so, we will be doing Stitch and Glitch on Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern. So hopefully you can join us for that. It'll be on the Quilt Nerding YouTube. If you can't make it to that, we will see you next week. And again, you guys, Tish accidentally showed us her subscription, not realizing she did. But to all of you, thank you so much for your subscriptions. You guys, you make this a wonderful thing to do. And I wish I could say it's my job. It's not my job yet, but I'm working on it. All right, guys, you take care, and I will talk to you soon. Mwah!